Hi, and welcome to our roundtable discussion at the World IP Forum for 2021, where today we focus on IP for IT. I'm Dallas Wilkinson, Regional Managing Director for Dynamite Asia Pacific, and I'm your host today. I started my career with a degree in IT, so I'm very pleased to see the significant advances over the last many decades since I did that study. And today we're going to talk and focus on IP in IT. The importance of IP for IT has been magnified over the last year as the world has battled with COVID and continue to operate due to incredible contribution of the IT industry. The importance of IT to the world economy has become very clear and obvious over this period. This situation was further emphasised late last year when Prime Minister Modi from India addressed the Bangalore Technology Summit in November, and he emphasised the importance of IT to the Indian economy and the global economy, which highlighted his excitement with IT as the world embraces virtual working environment, which allows countries like India to compete without major barriers of entry to this important IT market. Remote operations, big data, Internet of Things, and other areas where such important technology is being developed, it's really important to consider IP, how to protect those assets the companies are investing in to make new systems, new processes for the industry and for every organisation. So as we commercialise IT, we need to think about IP and the impact on everyone's lives. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our discussion today as we debate, challenge, and explore IP in the IT arena. Our discussions today will touch on areas including IP management, IP creation, IP law, IP monetization, IP and other forms and patents, and future trends that are envisaged for my experienced panel. So today we are privileged to have panelists from 3 major IT companies, as well as other experts in this IP from IT space. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our very expertise panel. I'd like to start with the first panelist, Subhadip Sakar, who's the Vice President of IP and Legal at Cognizant Technology Solutions. Subhadip is currently working in the Cognizant Technology Solutions and has more than 2 decades of experience working in diverse industries with successful record of leadership, accomplishments in both products and service industries in multiple technology domains. His current role, Subhadip spearheads and manages intellectual property, technology and commercial transactions, legal operations and governance, and Indian government affairs. Welcome, Subhadip. Our next panelist, Subodh Kumar, heads up the IP filing and response service team of Tata Consultancy Services. In his current leadership role, Subodh works with his team to protect Tata's intellectual property across the globe. His experience over the last 2 decades encompasses managing IP, strategy, operational leadership, project and program management, corporate IP initiatives, policy advocacy, government and industry relationship management. He also has expertise in looking at policy reforms to strengthen Indian IP regime and contributed to strengthening of public-private partnerships for establishing IP cells across India. Welcome to that.
Hello.
Our next panelist is Faz Rahman. Faz is IP Head of Infosystems, a global software company based in India with operations in more than 60 countries. He has nearly 20 years of experience in handling a variety of IP issues. Before joining Infosys, he was leading IP at Vipro Technologies, which is another large technology company. Welcome, Faz. Our next panelist, Rebecca Baldi. Rebecca comes from Dynamite Consulting team located in Munich. She supports clients in achieving IP excellence and has expertise in strategy, organisation, operations and change management with a very deep experience in IT. The industry she's worked in cover energy, utilities, manufacturing, consumer goods, chemical industry, life sciences, healthcare, telecoms, and logistics, as well as finance. Welcome, Brigitte. Our final panelist, Parag Thakra. Parag is currently Managing Director for Dynamite India, and he is a very techno-commercial person with over 20 years experience in industry, looking at hands-on research and the whole IP aspect of that piece. He's played an instrumental role in establishing and developing IP monetization and valuation analytics in a previous role, and has great experience in helping us understand that IP monetization piece. He's active in the Indian startup space, in innovation ecosystems, interested in enabling innovation, mentoring, commercializing technology and IP, and starting and growing new ventures. Welcome, Parag. So, you can see that we have a very, very experienced panel, and we'll start now with our first question. And the first area we're going to focus on is actually IP management. And the first question I'd like to ask Subhadip will be, what are some of the management operational challenges in running an effective IP management strategy in an IT company? Subhadip.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, and glad to meet all the expert panelists. Now, this question is a very broad question. I'll focus on, of course, there are a lot of challenges and issues from a day-to-day point of view that we face, but I'll probably focus on two, three items to start with. First, of course, is the changing landscape of technology and how business strategy is changing to align to some of these changing technology landscape also brings a lot of challenges to the intellectual property group. And it is always a struggle for the IP group to understand this technology landscape and how to align with the business strategy, because the strategy of IP that you may have a year back or 2 years back will suddenly change, and you will have to quickly align to the business, because the end of the day, whatever way you look at it, the IP function is a support function to the business, and it's a corporate function. So unless the team is aligned to the business strategy or the technology changes, and most of the companies, they also keep changing their own strategy for different reasons, not just about technology change. So it becomes very important for our team or the IP team to get aligned to that. So that is one of the larger issues, and how do we quickly adapt to that change is always a challenge for the team. That brings to the second point, which is also important in terms of having the right resource and competency within the team. While resource is available, but at the same time, it is always a challenge that how do I equip or enable my team to learn this technology quickly, align it, and have a line of sight with business. Because if the IP team is talking to business, they have to speak their language, not just the technology language, but also understand the overall business landscape. So there is a constant need for the IP department to ensure that all their associates, all their employees are trained, irrespective of they may have good amount of experience, but this constant training is always an important aspect. The third aspect, which is definitely one of the common issues, I would say, it's all about budget. Budget has always been a challenge for every organization, and the key is, how do I use the budget? It's not about getting the money from the corporate department to run your IP, but how do I really use this money or use the budget effectively to show some value to business? And the definition of value to business again changes from one organization to another. Some may see that, okay, how do I monetize revenue, my IP portfolio, to generate revenues directly or indirectly? That's a value for one company. Some companies may say that, no, my value is that, do I have a strong portfolio which can defend me tomorrow if I am in issue, right? That's another value. The third value could be, for another company, could be that, have I collated all my inventions across the company and ensure that they are protected? Whether I use it defensively or aggressively, that's a futuristic issue. But the collation, have I done a proper IP mining? Have I done an invention mining to figure out, gather all the inventions and protect on time? So the point that I'm trying to drive is, how do I ensure that the business unit gets a value out of the limited budget is one of the key aspects. And the last point which I want to touch upon is, while we do a lot of activities within the IP department, the technology and the tools supporting that plays a very important role. What is the right tool that I should have? Now, this again links to the budget aspect also, that do I have sufficient budget to ensure that I have the right tools? Today, the tools market has also aggressively moved, and there are a lot of technologies that are getting implemented in even the traditional IP tools. Now, do I have the right tools to help my associates deliver the best, create that value for business. That is also a challenge, I would say, in terms of getting the right infrastructure and competency and tools in place to deliver the best to the business. So I'll probably stick to these 3-4 areas, though of course I can go on and on, but these are some of my initial thoughts in terms of challenges.
Great, thanks, Steve, for that great insights. Really enjoyed listening to your issue about skilling up the organisation. That's a really critical part, isn't it? So if we then think about that context, and then what are some of the global trends in IP management that also may drive the future of IP management, please, Brigitte?
I cannot agree more to your points, and I can definitely instantiate in the one or the other in a short speak here. So I'm asked what global trends will impact IP management, and I stick to an old one. I stick to digitalization, because in this pandemic situation, we have seen that it has accelerated even the implementation of digitalization, even in areas where we have not seen it in such an importance before. So the implementation of digital modes of working are definitely be driven forward by the pandemic situation, and I've seen that even with some more traditional based companies over the last year heavily. So, but I do not see digitalization as an end in itself. It's an enabler, at least in IP. So I appreciate your last point on the digital tools that we need, but these are only enablers, and I don't see any effect that they will completely replace the human mind in IP anytime soon. However, being a computer scientist, I have to work on computers and software and algorithms, and they're definitely essential to collect and to systemize and to process large amounts of data. And in IP, we are talking really about large amounts of data. So machines, artificial intelligence, machine learning, name it, can derive data, can analyze patterns, and maybe even find new ones. But for now, in my understanding, a human mind is still required to do the final interpretation with the help of good tools, but do the final interpretation and at least derive decisions from it. Because the final decision has always an emotional part in it, and that cannot be done by any artificial intelligence as I know them. But consequently, having that said before, is we have to have an eye on the role of the IP manager, because this role is changing, and you already mentioned that building the right capabilities, building continuous learning, keeping on the same on either level of the researchers, the developers. So an IP manager, in my understanding, becomes a business-oriented asset manager. It's not this administrative person managing portfolios of bigger or smaller sizes, but they reduce these administrative parts, because that can be easily taken over by tools, or at least heavily supported by tools. But what they have to increase is communication and the advice portion of that job. So these IP transformations go into the direction of digitalization, but the major part is, and you said that before, we have to influence the soft factors, the learning, the mindset of the people working with that, their behaviors, so that we all develop together into a direction of working together towards business value. Dennemeyer worked on a study which is published these days, The Future of IP, in its second edition, and I would like to summarize the main insights from an interview-based approach with a large panel of experts and thought leaders worldwide, with 5 somehow maybe nice theses. So the first thesis I have is IP awareness is growing, but slowly. Our panel recognized that the importance of intangibles in general is growing, full stop. IP assets are contributing to business success. That's more or less accepted knowledge right now. And that's the best point of it, the perception of IP is shifting from a mere cost factor, and that's your budget discussion that you mentioned earlier, to an active contribution to revenue. And it's not only meant by monetization, it's meant by full exploitation in all areas. Our second thesis is on IP strategy, and I mentioned that before. It says IP strategy, a rallying cry. And our experts indicated that more effort is now going into IP and IPR strategy development, closely aligned with the business strategies. And giving an example, last year I've written, I think, 6 or 7 different IP strategies, completely different from its level, from its orientation, helping clients to really focus their IP work with strategic objectives on what they're going to do in their corporate or in their business unit strategy. Our third thesis is a brave new world of outsourcing. And here we see something that is going to both ends of the balance. We have seen that there is a tendency either to do as much IP work as you can inside your company, so putting all synergies together, or on the opposite, keep as little as possible within the company, but do not give up the control. Fourth, and that's recap of what I said before, digital age is not coming, it has arrived. So I won't focus on the tools, I will focus on the acceptance and the implementation within the organization, because the best tool does not work if you do not have anybody who's able to use it and who's accepted the results that comes out of it. And the fifth is the role of the future IP manager. And I've seen that they are going closely and interrelate seamless in the innovation processes. So it's not somebody sitting in his office doing some administrative work, but it's really working with research and development, with the software developers, and influencing each other. So it's not a give and, or it's a give and take, but in a very, very close way. So concluding this, I would just summarize not 5, but three major points. The first one is embrace change, because we cannot survive without. Foster flexibility, and that's a major point if we talk to more traditional IP departments. And do not change for the sake of change, because I've seen a lot of transformations that started because we need to transform. No, first you need to set the direction, and you set to detect the gaps, and then you need really meaningful transformation efforts. Thank you.
Great, thanks Brigitte for those comments and insights into IP management, particularly importance of strategy. I really enjoyed that part of it. Okay, I want to ask any other panelists who've got a comment to make on IP management before we move on to the next topic. Anyone else wants to make a comment?
Yeah, just to, I think Subhadeep and Brigitte have comprehensively covered all the points. Just a small perception I want to add on to their points, especially from a strategic point of view. So today, if I look at an IT service sector, an IT consulting sector, where the patents are primarily created and protected to support solutions and products which are offered in the market. Though the direct monetization of patent is not much, it is the product or the solution or the platforms which get monetized, and the patents support those kind of offerings. So one of the key challenges I just want to add to what my speakers, co-panelists have shared, is that the having protected an intellectual property in any form, either a patent or copyright, the next big challenge is how do we translate that IP into value creation for customers, and how does that add value to the business? So having said that, the larger questions that would come up when we interact with our customers is that, has IP created the right differentiation? Has the IP created the right competitive advantage? Or has IP brought in a customer perception which brings in more confidence into the innovation capability of the organization. So these are certain intangible aspects which come into play, and where the IP manager would have to work with the business unit to be able to translate the value, help them realize their value, and the bottom lines of the customers should have some kind of an impact through this entire process. I think this is one of the key challenges which, as an IP manager from an IT sector, an IT service sector and consulting business is facing.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, sir. I really appreciate those comments. And that leads nicely into our next discussion point about IP creation. I'd like you to continue, please, and share your perspective on IP creation models, which are shaping the IP landscape in the IT industry, please.
Taking forward again from the earlier point, the technology wave, the trends of technology, the changing business models, I think the IP creation models are also fast emerging to suit those requirements. And here we talk about IP creation models which are collaborative between various partners, collaborative between customers, third parties, service providers, and academic institutions, so on. It's a very vibrant ecosystem which is collaborative in nature. And the second most important point is it is location agnostic, because we have inventors across the world inventing. And of course, the present situation, the pandemic situation, has definitely forced us to think beyond being confined to a particular location, to be completely location agnostic in terms of creation of IP. And while we say that, there are several other parameters, like how secure are our systems and how interoperable are our systems. So how intuitive are our platforms for creation of IP. So here within TCS, we have built several models, and one important model what we regularly employ is the collaborative invention mining methodology, where we work across various locations to see how the inventions are matured, primarily collaboratively. But then very important questions considering the changes in the technology landscape, how intuitive these inventions are, how anticipative they are for the future challenges, how they are, as I mentioned, location agnostic, how they are adaptable, how they are interoperable. All these aspects come into the invention mining area, where we'll have to think futuristically, few years down the line, how these inventions are going to impact the market. So in a nutshell, the IP creation models have always and always will defy the boundaries or the silos which the technologies have, and it also defies the geographical boundaries, and more important, it will also rekindle the thoughts which are anticipative and futuristic. I think that's all I have to say about the IP creation models.
Great. Thanks for that. I particularly like the idea around the globe has no boundaries anymore. So thank you for sharing that. So next question for Fiaz is how deep are innovation trends within the IT industry, and how critical are patents enabling such innovation? So,
thanks, Dallas. So, yeah, I think there is a very steep innovation trend within IT industry. There is no doubt about it. And when we are talking about fourth industrial revolution, and that is happening on the back of all these emerging technologies within IT itself. So I think that is certainly being driven by IT industry. But we'll have to still wait, because the jury is out to decide whether this innovation trend includes invention trends. That is still not stable, because if you look at the patenting activity in some of the emerging technologies areas, whether it's IoT, whether it's AI, blockchain, two things are quite noticeable: that either the nature of inventions being filed for patents are lacking one or the other key attribute. It will either not be detectable in terms of infringement, or the scope is very narrow, or it is a functional implementation of the technology rather than the core technology itself. So the core inventions are not that many. That's what my sense is. Second is this is further reflected in statistics also. Statistically, I don't think we still see a very sharp uptick as you would expect in a when we are talking about an industrial revolution. Then suddenly you should expect a corresponding revolution in patenting activity or invention activity, which is not yet there. So I think we, realistically speaking, we are uh, either still waiting for that whole floodgates to open for avenues and areas for patenting to pick up in these areas, or these are not the right areas to expect a very sharp rise in patent activity. There certainly is. I mean, it will be wrong to say that there is, it's not there, but it's not really in the high grade. It's still in the medium grade, and a lot is still desirable. So I think the key message is that organizations that are attempting to patent and capture their inventions should need to sort of reimagine their framework of deciding what is invention, because upstream, if you don't judge it right, downstream you'll end up spending a lot of efforts and get nothing. So that is a one reality check that is needed, that we need to very carefully and craftfully come up with a model or a framework to decide, quote unquote, what is innovation and differentiate it with what is invention. And so I think that's the larger point I was trying to drive.
Yeah, it's a great point, Faz. What is innovation, and how important is it to your industry and your company before you start spending lots of money with it? So thanks for sharing that insight. Appreciate that. Any other views from the other panelists, please, I'd like to share?
Just one point I wanted to add. I completely agree with Faiz and Subodh, and also to add to what Faiz was saying, that the trend that we see and we will possibly continue to see on the patenting side with evolving technologies, that patents are now becoming more specific. The concept of having a broad umbrella patent, motherhood patent, and all that is slowly going away. The primary aspect is because of multiple reasons. I mean, I'm not talking about the legal part of the law part of it, that it's difficult to get those broad patents, etc. nowadays. But more importantly, people have to be very specific as to what they want to protect and for what reason. And obviously, budget, etc. is a constraint. So the quality of the invention is very important. Secondly, and most importantly, is that some of these technologies are evolving in such rapid pace. It's a call that should I really patent something, or I possibly keep some of it as a trade secret and confidential information and move on, and then we will see it later on. So this is a changing trend that we will see with so many changing technologies of blockchain or AI or IoT, etc. that Faiz talked about. So only these 2 points I thought of adding.
Excellent. Parag?
Yeah. So as a follow-up, actually, I agree with Faiz, Shubhadeep, as well as Subodh, right? So one is the speed at which the innovation is happening in these areas, right? And second is the complex ecosystems, right? So ecosystems are so complex that one company can't control the whole ecosystem or have a monopoly across. So co-creation, collaboration is the key going forward, and it's already happening. And it's not only between companies, it is also between, say, academia and company, because if you're looking at some disruptions which will happen, say, 5 years, 6 years down the line, that are best done at the place where the basic research is happening, which may or may not be possible in the industry setup, right? So I think co-creation, collaboration is the thing which will drive innovations in most of these high-tech areas. Yeah, there's the addition.
Great, thanks, Parag. And we might move forward. Look at IP monetization. And it's an important part of the IP industry, obviously, is to get the value back out of your creation. So I'd like to ask Suhadip, how do you determine the right IP commercialization strategy for your company or for any company?
Yeah, thank you. So IP commercialization strategy, again, I'll link it up with my initial thought when I said that what is the ideal definition of commercialization for an organization? That is where this is the starting point. And one must also understand that the commercialization strategy usually, and not usually, but will definitely change with industry domains. The commercialization or monetization strategy that you see in pharma will be different from IT, will be different from, so every industry will have that. And even within IT, even within one domain, if I do, IT is a topic of today's discussion, so we'll stick to that. But even within IT, the strategy of monetization may change significantly, because the definition of commercialization may also vary. So, for example, if you really look at the commercialization strategy, the factors or the drivers, one would be what is the overall objective of a company, whether the company is trying to make an aggressive strategy or it's going to be a defensive strategy, saying that I'll build my portfolio to defend myself rather than going aggressively asserting my patent rights, right? So that may be one strategy. And licensing is just one part, and I'm sure my co-panelist will also add to some of the typical strategies around this, which I will not touch upon now. But in terms of drivers, that is very important in terms of overall approach. The second approach is overall the risk appetite of the company. Also, it is also important to understand the portfolio. What because end of the day, if you're commercializing it, you're commercializing a portfolio. So how strong is your portfolio? Have you done an audit to figure out what is the portfolio, what is the market demand, who are some of the potential companies or entities that may be interested in taking a license from you? So there are multiple of these factors which should be evaluated before you come out with a strategy. And it need not be one strategy, it can be multiple strategies, saying that this particular portfolio I'll not touch, I'll keep it, is more of a defensive. Another portfolio I have, this I will go aggressively in the market. The third one I will keep it for branding or whatever is the other stuff, right? So it has to be a mix of strategies depending on different scenarios, and I'm just drawing a broad line or frame in terms of what are some of the driving factors.
Great. Some really good points there, and I particularly like the idea of the strategy again coming into this discussion, because that's a critical part, isn't it? Get the thought right to start. So Parag, I'd like to ask you next. What are some of the few aspects you look at when you're talking about commercializing IP in software, and particularly how can IP add value to the software business?
Yep. So I think to start with, let us first define what is IP, right? So if I look at it from IP monetization perspective, right, anything intangible that can be sold to me is an IP. So there are registered forms of IP like your patents, trademarks, copyrights, but there are many other things. And let us stick to the software/IT domain here, right? So source code, technology know-how, right? Industry experience, understanding of a particular vertical, right? Even your understanding of the supply chain, your vendors, your clientele, all that is in some way a form of your know-how as well as IP, right? And all of that can be monetized, right? Now coming back to what Subhadeep was saying, right? So yes, the strategy is based on a particular appetite of and the profile of the company, and also what is the roadmap of the company in terms of business as well as IP. But I look at it basically as a two-pronged approach. One is IP which is core to your business, which is actually embedded in your products, and IP which is not core, right? So what I would like to put my thoughts is on IP which is not core, right? Because it really becomes simple for an organization to monetize that form of IP, and there is no conflict, right? If there is an IP which is sitting in your products, and obviously you want to monetize it, the best way to monetize it is to actually monetize it through the product set, right? Because it gives you competitive advantage. But in any big company, there are always some or the other forms of IP which are sitting on the shelf. You created that as a part of some big project, but at the same time, it is not a part of your core product portfolio. You might have also created IP, maybe systems, processes, some software code for increasing productivity internally, maybe for sharing some teamwork, or for increasing some process productivity or speed and stuff like that, right? So all these IP, which is sitting somewhere in your organization, which is not core to your product, can be monetized. And if you want to set up an IP monetization department, this IP is really core to that IP monetization department, because there is no conflict with your product portfolio, right? So let us come to what are different business models by which you can monetize this. And if you look at any big companies like IBM, Dolby, GE, all of their monetization departments or licensing departments actually work on this set of IP which is not core to their products, and then they implement different monetization models for it, right? Now, if I look at it specifically from software, the very pragmatic way of monetizing software is actually sell the software itself, right? Now, when you talk about sell the software itself, it can be source code or it could be an executable file, right? When you give source code to someone, you are done with it. Means you just sell it and then it's gone, right? But when you are putting it in a black box, there is a chance that you can have a tail of the deal, because someone will keep coming back to you for new updates, right? But at the same time, you have to understand that you're not giving a user license. So the difference between user license and when you sell a software is there is no liability on you to actually maintain the software after the sale is done, right? As compared to when you are actually doing a software sale versus this licensing mode. So that is the most pragmatic way. Just find out the software which is not usable in the core product, just go and sell it off either as a source code or executable. Now, other ways of models, other business models which are evolving and also upcoming are, for example, data monetization, right? In today's world, if you have a structured data and a curated data and a use case for it, you'll always find someone who is willing to pay for it, right? Now, how do you sell this data? Again, there are different ways to do that. There are nowadays there are many platforms which gives you an opportunity to inject data and create models, right? So you can either sell data in a structured and curated manner, or you can also sell the analytics or insights which are coming out of it, or the models which are coming out of it, right? And again, when you're monetizing these models or data, there are different ways of doing it. You might have a static data or a dynamic data. When you're trying to sell models which are based on static data, your data leakage should not be there. It should be very, very secured, because once your data is leaked, your value proposition is gone. But if you're selling something which is more dynamic in nature, so for example, sales data which keeps on updating over a period of time, then it becomes really easy, because the customer is logged and they keep on coming to get more and more data. So that monetization models are being used up in today's world. The third piece is, and this is something which not many of Indian companies are looking at, is standard essential patents, right? So wherever there is some kind of interface, there is always an interoperability issue, and people need to look for standards, right? Maybe it is video compression or communication or IoT, right? There are always opportunities or domains or interfaces where a lot of standards are coming up, right? Many Indian companies are not looking into that, but there is a big opportunity if you are creating IP which can go into standards. It does two things. One is you actually create a royalty for the lifetime of the patent, right? Perennial royalty for the lifetime of the patent. And the second thing is you also create a thought leadership in that particular domain as a part of the standard essential patent owner, right? So that is, I would say, third model which people look at. The fourth model is completely business oriented. Suppose you have a piece of code, you're working into B2B domain, but you have created something which can be used for B2C domain. Obviously, it doesn't align with your business strategy, overall business strategy, but you can take this piece of code or take this team and spin it off, or maybe create a startup out of it, right? And let it grow as an independent company and get the venture capital and stuff like that. Now, these are not just theoretical model. There are many examples where big companies have spinned off smaller teams or smaller products which are not core to their portfolio, right? And created a lot of value out of it over a period of time, right? So that is one thing. And then there is another trend which I'm seeing is on the joint venture side, right? More so because data is mostly owned by someone else, models are owned by someone else. There is an example where a company which was owning data for plastic recycling, different chemical data, they actually created joint venture with another company which has a digital twin model for the same, right? So both these companies had complementary skill set, they came together and created a joint venture to kind of recycle the plastic in a better manner, right? And there are many such examples right now. And the last and not the least is brand licensing, which is again not something which we are very aware, and we do not look at it from Indian perspective. You can go for co-branding, you can go for whiteboard licensing opportunities, right? This is a purely trademark play. It not only creates monetization opportunity, but it also creates a brand equity for the company, right? So there are multiple ways by which you can actually create these values in an inorganic manner from the IP which is not core to your business, right? And as you can understand, you need a team with the right skill set, people with business understanding, IP understanding, finance understanding, marketing, sales, all that experiences, right? And once you have this kind of a team, you can actually start not only working as an enabling function, but you also start adding to the cash generation of the company.
Great.
Those are some of my thoughts. Yep.
Thanks for those insights, Parag. And certainly it's a complex area, the software area, as we've talked about many times. Okay, moving now to look at the roundtable discussion. It's about the future trends in IP for IT. And so looking for now some comments, brief comments if you could please, on what you see expect in the next 10 years in the IT industry. What trends do you see over the next 10 years? And how will this require change in how we protect new IP created during that time? So maybe Subhadeep, can you start us off, please?
Sure. Very quickly, I'll just take 1 minute to give you an overview. One is I think that most of the companies will move to a concept that quality is more important than quantity, and having that strategic portfolio of patent is going to be extremely important, because because there will be constant pressure on how do I derive value rather than, I would say, monetization, commercialization, revenue generation. I'll say, how do I generate value for my portfolio? And maintenance, the regime of maintenance or the rigorous due diligence that one needs to do before you decide that this portfolio will be maintained, will be strengthened, is what I feel. Second is, people with technology moving so fast, and we have talked about it, how do I build very quickly my strategic portfolio? So acquisition of portfolios, small, patent portfolio or IP led acquisition will be very significant for companies. This way they can build strong portfolio very quickly rather than just going through the normal organic way of growing. So that will be the second trend. The third trend will be, there will be a constant pressure on IP team to deliver value for business, what I talked about, because it is extremely important for the IP team to sit with business, identify what is patentable, what are the inventions, do the IP mining strategically, quickly come out with inventions and protect them. That is, if the IP team is not equipped to manage this, then the business will not see much value from our IP team. So these are some of the trends that I see. Of course, there are many, but these are primarily my initial thoughts.
Great thoughts there. Okay, I'm going to ask Subodh what your thoughts are now, please.
Yeah, that is exactly what Subhadeep has shared. I mean, that's the direction in which the IT sector is going towards IP. And we also touched upon the changing life cycle, the shrinking boundaries of life cycle. So that would require accelerated examination procedures to bring clarity on interpretation, on patentability, patent eligibility. I think that's going to be very important, and primarily because we cannot look at IT in isolation today. IT is a common denominator, and it has impact on various other sectors also, be it food, agriculture, or infrastructure, or transportation. So when we talk about innovations in IT, we are not looking at it in a silo. We are looking at it in the context of how it can benefit the society at large. So understanding and interpreting the patentability aspects surrounding computer-related invention is going to be a very important thing for future. That is one area where we will all have to focus. The entire ecosystem have to work together to see how we can bring it, either through jurisprudence or through discussions or in any form. And second is about the prosecution cycles. We'll have to see how we could improve, how could we bring more clarity into interpretations by examiners and also the right holders, so that the time to receive a grant is as minimal as possible. And that would require, as I mentioned, accelerated examination. And who knows, while we speak 10 years down the line, we may also be talking about alternate forms of protection, because especially in the area of AI, when AI has been a focus of discussion, is patent systems is it sufficient enough to protect the technological advancement in AI? So that may trigger some alternate models. We don't know in future. No, we may entirely come up with new models of IP protections. So with that positive note, I would like to end my remarks.
Great, thanks for sharing that too, and I like the challenge of AI brought into this discussion again as well. Faz, what's your thoughts around the future?
Yeah, so I think that's what Subodh is saying is very important, and that's everybody's wish list, that we see shrinking or accelerated examination procedures, alternate models. We really hope that it evolves sooner than later, because that's how the IP system will be able to enable the fourth industrial revolution as we know it. So these are our wish lists. We really hope that happens. But one thing which I think is certainly happening is, at least on the provider side within the IP life cycle, all the tools and docketing systems that we have, we see a good, I won't say good, but still there is a progress. There is a movement. There is a good degree of automation, sophistication that is coming in the in the patent databases, in the docketing systems, etc. A lot of automation we have seen. There's a synchronization between patent office records and in the private systems of the organization. So that will automate a lot of workflows within, for the IP teams and for the organizations. It will simplify and make user experience better. That is definitely the trend. We will, whether the law catches up or not, but I think the technology is holding the hand, and it's taking the IP environment in some positive direction. There'll be a lot of disintermediation for the law firms that will happen. A lot of work will get automated, synchronized, the records, the data, the workflows, the timelines. A lot of those will get automated. There are a lot of players who are offering new features, new point solutions. I think that is a definite trend, which is a welcome change, which is, I think, is very much around the corner. I think within a year or two, we will have a very fairly sophisticated and I would say generation 2 or generation 3 of these products and tools that IP teams and the corporates can use and make their operations much efficient.
Great, thanks for that, Faz. Brigitte, would you like to share your last couple of comments, please, on the future?
Just to keep it short, I really love if we can get a good graphical user interface for all our IP tools, because I know so many people, and I'm one of the ones in the first line, who are struggling with all these different systems, and we do a lot of advice, or we are asked for a lot of advice. Which system should I use to get, for example, my software developer to read a patent? Because they do not read it, and it's not only the patent itself, it's already the retrieval. So we have still these last century look and feel in several systems. We have less connectivity, we have a low level of automation. So this is my first wish for the next, and if we can go within 1 or 2 years phase, so I keep fingers crossed. The other aspect that you all mentioned, Subodh, are great too, but I think they are more mid to long term. For the next 10 years, we will definitely see more consolidation in the market, and we will definitely see that the IT industry will influence all the others as well. I just say, for example, if we discuss the question, what's the cost of free software? That does not affect only the IT industry, that affects me and each industry. Things like that will evolve and raise to our attention sooner or later.
Great, thanks, Brigitte. Thanks very much. And Parag, finally, your few comments, please, around the future.
Yeah, keeping it short, as we had been discussing right from the beginning, right? So digitalization is something which is there. It is already there, and pandemic actually forced people to do it at an accelerated phase, and it is one of those enabling things which enables many things, right? So it is very interesting to see how it happens from both from the vendor side as well as from the user side. and then different IP creation models, as we discussed, right? Those will also evolve. And I'm also looking forward to how we actually use IP for creating value, business value, in terms of cash as well as other stuff, right? Yep.
Great. Thank you very much, Parag, and thank you all for your wonderful contribution today. I thought I'd just summarise the points you've made, because it's a huge number of points we've talked about today, and for the audience, I thought they might like just get a consolidation view of what we've picked up today. And I particularly like when we first started out talking about the importance of the strategy and making sure that the IP teams align to that strategy. They are skilled to actually enable that strategy through speaking the language of the business. I think it's a really important point that's been brought out today. And then making sure that the budget you get in IP is actually used effectively to create value for the organisation. And it's important to continue to audit that value to ensure it is coming out of there and spend the money in the right places. That's an important part we saw today. Could it be IP for IT or IP for any industry as well? I think the comment that Brigitte made earlier about that IP will not replace the human mind. We need to have this still. That artificial intelligence does not get to displace the human mind. The human mind's still there. It's still important to make those jumps, that invention, that creativeness that we have. And that's an important part when we talk about IT, because AI always comes in a discussion, as we heard today. We heard some insights from Brigitte about the future of IP and some of the learning from the work we've done in studying that, things around the speed of IP, the awareness of IP growing, the importance of intangibles now in balance sheets of companies, that IP equals business success. And I love that piece particularly, that the success of your business really determines on how you run your IP, and therefore a strategy in IP again. And then the issue around the an efficient IP strategy being developed, and also the role of outsourcing, how you do the IP, and then what you do from that perspective. We heard a lot about IP creation, and particularly collaboration, and I love the idea of location agnostic, because that says we can create anywhere across the world IP. It doesn't matter who's working with who now, and that unlocks a huge amount of value, because the brains all over the world can work together now to create the next step out, the next innovation, the next inventive step for us. And that's important in any IP system, and it then moves towards how the IP system of the world now going to be global or regional or local, and we need to think about those things as we move forward as well. It's challenging in organisations as to what inventions are important and how they actually define an invention, because that's where you spend your money. So upstream, talking about that invention, is it important to invest money in that to develop that to monetize that, or quickly get the money and move to the next invention? They're some of the challenges we spoke about today as well. So the speed of change was really important, as we saw here, and that's driving the decision-making process, whether we stay with patents or we move to copyrights, or importantly trade secrets, because that shortening of the life cycle now is starting to challenge that part. And we've seen that particularly in the IT industry, but right across the whole industry segments that we all play in. The importance of AI and that ownership question is going to come up time and time again, and it was certainly raised today, and I think it's uncovered a lot more thoughts for us now to have how we might address that in the future. So talking about how that relates to the patenting system, of course, and I particularly like the idea of that motivation of an incentive system versus creating knowledge, and where AI fits between the two of them. If it's motivation in terms of incentive system, AI is not really relevant, but it comes to creating knowledge, AI does that very, very well. We then moved on again about the cost of maintaining IP, and a particularly important question when you talk about the IT industry and the speed again of that IP being generated. I think the other one that comes out here, we keep going back to the skills again, and we talk about how those skills are addressing and being trained to get into IP and make sure they're relevant to the industry you're working in. And that then brings up the question about the IP regions and the regime, that we have in our regions. Is that still okay? Are the regimes we're talking about right, or should we be changing them to particularly promote the IT aspects we're talking about today? We've already covered some of those points. So software needs to be considered differently. That was one of the things we heard earlier, and I think there's probably some merit in that, as we talked about earlier, because again, there's shrinking time of innovation, and software is the heart of that. The software advances, and that moved on later to the graphic user interface, which I think is a really valid point we should think about, because that's an artistic license as well as something which is very inherent in an asset of an organisation. That visual image, we talk about the trademarking aspect, so to speak. Then looking at IP monetization, and this one's a really important part of any IP discussion, particularly the strategy aspect of that monetization. We brought into that the valuation picture as well, because valuation and monetization go hand in hand. So understanding the strength of your IP portfolio, the purpose behind your IP assets. Why do I have that asset? That's a really important part we heard today as well. And so IP is core to your business, and understanding that core part to your business, or is it actually a sideline to your business and you want to keep innovating rapidly and then you don't mind licensing it out, etc. We then moved into the data picture, and data monetization was an interesting theme that I got out of this discussion today. That actually aspect of the ownership of the data, using the data, and creating that data into knowledge, and then ultimately into wisdom. And that brought up the need then for standards around data. And then some of those other aspects we talk about with data monetization. So I like the idea of the machine learning points that were brought in, because machine learning really was talking about that is the magic that makes the data from crude oil to refined oil. And I think that machine learning is a really important part for us to consider as we move forward in the IT industry, and particularly looking at IP lens. So again, some of the trends aspect we picked up today then, I like the idea of organisations reviewing their IP portfolio for quality, not quantity. Quality of an IP asset is really what makes the money for the organisation. The quantity can be good from the view of showing a metric to a board of directors, but it doesn't necessarily make the money for the organisation. The quality of the IP asset is really, really critical to that part. So I love that idea of linking IP monetization, IP valuation to that quality of an IP asset, and therefore creating value and unlocking potentially huge amounts of value to not just the company, but to the shareholders and to the whole community at large. So then we talked about the trends of maybe bringing into this the acquisition aspect of buying IP portfolios, and that's going to be a big part of the future in IP and IT, I believe. And we're seeing IT at those crossroads of all industries now, because that's where the big advances are coming from, is actually getting the IP from the IT industry that goes right across many, many industries. And I see it from my personal point of view in the mining industry I've worked for many years into. IT is changing that community enormously. We're seeing that right now. So the clarity of patents comes important there, not thinking about the IP in isolation, but how it fits in the whole value chain. Challenging ourselves around from the invention right through to the release of the technology in the market. How can we do it faster, better? I think that's being brought up a number of times, and challenging that paradigm. So then finally we talked about IP tools and the importance of those tools in what I call deep learning, because they get unlocked the huge wealth of IP out there, and bring some logic to that, but we can't see and can't do in terms of our normal day-to-day lives and our brain. The deep learning comes out of that bringing those pieces of data together and getting a system to really focus on where those next advances may come from. So digitalization then is the final thing that we talked about in terms of the future trends. But for me, I summarized this discussion today really around strategy. And I really think the message is very clear from this panel. Go back and review your IP strategy. If you're in the IT industry, review it quickly, because it's going to change so fast. But the strategy comes the pivotal point of unlocking that value from IP today to make sure that your business stays around for the long term and generates lots of value to put back into more IP generation, so back into R&D. So with that, I'd like to thank this great panel today for their contribution to this discussion. The roundtable has been a great exercise. I really enjoyed going through this work with you guys, and thank you again for sharing your insights. Wish you all the best for your future, and may your strategy be a great strategy and create lots more value for the IP industry and also for the IT industry. Thanks again. Bye for now.
Thank you.